All right. Uh, Today we're going to begin Acts chapter 23. And I will tell you that in Acts chapter 23, I have to tell my least favorite story that I tell the whole school year. I have to tell in Acts chapter 23. So we'll get to that, and I'll make mention of it when we get to it, that this is a story that I have to tell. Now, let's look back real quick at Acts chapter 22. That was Paul's defense before the mob in Jerusalem. So we know that mob was attacking him, and the commander came and pulled him out of that. And as he was leaving with the commander, or with the troops, he said, "May I say something?" And the commander told him, that he could. He asked him a couple of questions about who he thought he was and everything. And then Paul went on to tell the story of his life. I called it Paul's four-step plan to witnessing. And hopefully you remember that, and hopefully you had a chance to watch the video of my four-step plan that I put on before spring break. But so Paul told what his life was like before Christ. He told how he came to know Christ, and he told them what his life has been like since Christ, right? But before he could do steps 2, 3, and 4, he had to do step 1, which of course was to make a connection. Right? So Paul did all that with the crowd, and when he finished, he mentioned something about the Gentiles, which of course caused those religious Jews to protest even more. And they kind of got mad again, and they said, rid the earth of him. He is not fit to live. And so the commander took him, had him brought into the barracks. They were getting ready to flog him, when Paul just kind of said, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen without a trial? And so Paul pulled that old Roman citizen's card out, and that alarmed everybody that was around there, because Roman citizens had rights that other people didn't. And so the commander talked to him, and Paul's like, I was born a Roman citizen. And the commander's like, I had to pay a big price for mine. And so obviously Paul did not get in a flogging or any more trouble there from the commander, but he wasn't free either. So the commander kept him in custody, I guess you could say, and he ordered that the next day, the people that were charging him with all the things they were charging him, the Sanhedrin, he ordered that they kind of present their case before him. And so the next day, that was going to happen. And that's kind of where we begin in Acts chapter 23. All right. So Paul was there. He brought him in to stand before the Sanhedrin, and 22 ended. And so now we begin 23, verse 1. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, my brothers. Kind of sounds like he's trying to make a connection with them, doesn't it? I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day. At this time, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Now, I don't know what was so offensive by Paul saying that I've tried to fulfill my duty to God, but the high priest did not like that very much, and so he ordered that somebody punch him in the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck. Now, today I don't think calling somebody a whitewashed wall would be that big of a deal. That's not that big of a put down. We wouldn't take that as major criticism, and so we can kind of laugh at that and say, what's the big deal? Ooh, whitewashed wall. But I want to tell you, back then, saying that to a religious leader was one of the worst things that you could call them. And in order to understand that, we have to understand what a whitewashed wall really was. All right? Now, back then, they didn't have Lowe's and Home Depot and all these great places to go buy really good paint when they needed to paint their walls. And so they were using what they called a whitewash, almost like a real thin white paint. And whenever their wall was getting old and dirty and maybe even starting to crumble a little bit, instead of replacing the whole wall, which would have been very hard to do, they would just whitewash it. They would cover it up. They would make it look brand new just by kind of painting over it. They didn't fix what was behind it, what was wrong with it. They just covered it up. And so that wall, when you walked in, you saw this new, hey, whitewashed wall, that looks really nice. What's behind that wall was a crumbling, dirty, old, disgusting wall. They just covered it up. And so what Paul was saying to these religious people is, inside your heart, you're crumbling, old, and evil, but you act like, on the outside, you act like you're this great religious person, but inside your heart is not. So basically, Paul was calling them a hypocrite, acting like something he was not. Now, if you remember, that kind of sounds familiar because in Acts chapter 5, Ananias and Sapphira were kind of acting like something they were not, and they were struck down dead. So it was a big deal to act like something you're not. And so this is what Paul is calling the high priest, a hypocrite. And that was a big deal. Not much worse he could have called him. Now, verse 4. Those who were standing near Paul said, "You dare to insult God's high priest?" Paul replied, "Brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest. For it is written, 'Do not speak evil about the ruler of your people.'" So Paul kind of apologized there. He went at him pretty hard, calling him a hypocrite, not realizing that it was the high priest. Verse 6, we go on. Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin. Now we got to remember the Sanhedrin is made up of Sadducees and Pharisees. And you might recall what the difference is between a Pharisee and a Sadducee. And we're gonna get to that in just a little bit. But there were some differences between the two groups. And they would come together to form the Sanhedrin. I know in my class when we first started talking about that, we kind of compared that to our political system now, where we have people that are Republicans, we have people that are Democrats, and together they make up the Congress. Right? But they might not like each other very much sometimes. And so you have, the Senate and the House of Representatives that make up this Congress with both Democrats and Republicans together. So this is this group. This is the separation. The Pharisees and Sadducees were kind of like that. They were kind of like the House of Representatives and the Senate, where they would have to come together to form the Congress. And so Paul, of course, he knew that because he was a Pharisee. So he knew exactly what made up the Sanhedrin. He knew exactly what the Sadducees believed and what they didn't believe. And of course, he knew what the Pharisees believed and what they didn't believe. And so he brilliantly uses that to help him in this case. Let's go on. Finishing up verse 6. Here we see Paul going back to step 2. He's already made a connection with them, right? Because he called him a brother, and he said, "I am a Pharisee." My brothers, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. I stand on trial because of my hope in the resurrection of the dead. When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. Because the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and that there are neither angels nor spirits. That's why they're so sad, you see, because they didn't believe in the resurrection of Christ. They also didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in the Holy Spirit. But the Pharisees acknowledged them all. They didn't explain it. They might not believe that Jesus was who he said he was, but they acknowledged the fact that he resurrected from the dead. He wasn't sure how it happened, or they weren't sure, but they at least acknowledged it. And so there was a great uproar, verse 9 tells us. And some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and argued vigorously. We find nothing wrong with this man. Of course they're going to say that because Paul just made a connection with them and said, I'm a Pharisee, son of a Pharisee. So the Pharisees are going to be like, well, this guy's not that bad. He's a Pharisee. We find nothing wrong with him. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him? And I find that very funny, because the Pharisees knew that the Sadducees didn't believe in angels or spirits, and so they're trying to kind of provoke them a little bit more. And it was kind of probably something like, what if an angel or a spirit? Knowing that that was going to provoke them to get even angrier, because we do that sometimes. When we're having a disagreement or an argument with somebody, those of you that have siblings, you know exactly how this works, but you know what really bugs them. You know what really hurts them. You know what really provokes them to anger, and so you like to bring that up just to get them more upset and probably get them in trouble by mom and dad. And so that's kind of what this Pharisee did here with the Sadducees. He really wanted to get to them and to provoke them. And so he said, what if an angel or a spirit has spoken to him? So the dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. He ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. Let me repeat Acts chapter 23, verse 11. It is the memory verse for this chapter. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. Now, Paul has a whole new focus. Right? His focus now, his driving force now, his number one goal now is to get to Rome. The Lord is telling him he must get to Rome. You must testify in Rome. So that becomes his driving force. That becomes his main focus. I got to get to Rome because I'm going to testify in Rome. And that is one of the reasons why verse 11 is your memory verse. Let's move on. My story's coming up, just so you know. I'm not looking forward to it. Verse 12. The next morning, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. Wow, you mean business. If you're going to take an oath that you're not going to eat or drink anything until you kill Paul. That's some serious people there with some serious issues with Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priest and elders and said, we have taken a solemn oath not to eat or eat anything until we have killed Paul. Now then, so here's their plan. You and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring him before you again on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. So they're going to try to get to the commander and say, we want to talk more about Paul, and we want to hear a little bit more about him before we really decide what we're going to do. So if you could just bring him one more time to us, and we can talk more. We want to make sure we get this right. Then they go on to say the real plot. We are ready to kill him before he gets here. Verse 16. But when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. So Paul's nephew kind of saved the day. He heard about this plot. He heard they had this plan devised to kill Paul. And they're going to try to use the commander to get him out of the barracks, right? Because he's a Roman citizen now, so he's being guarded in barracks, right? He's finally let them know at least that he was. And so they're waiting to get him. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him. So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you. Now, when you watch the Acts video a little bit later this week, I want you to remember that part because it always makes me laugh when I watch the Acts video because Luke actually goes into the character of this centurion and kind of talks like he's a centurion, and it's really kind of funny. And so look for that when you watch the Acts video later this week. The commander, this is verse 19, the commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and asked, what is it you want to tell me? He said, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him. They have taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting for your consent to their request. The commander dismissed the young man and cautioned him, don't tell anyone that you have reported this to me. Then he called two of his centurions and ordered them, get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide mounts for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix. Now I'm going to stop there before we get to the commander's letter to Governor Felix, because I have to tell my story. Right? Notice not one time did I say, I want to tell my story. I've been saying I have to tell my story. And we'll talk about why after I tell my story on why I have to. It was many years ago. I was in second grade, and we actually, for about 9 months, we lived in this trailer park, in this real nice trailer, actually, in a nice trailer park. But my dad was kind of in a transition with his work, and it was before he became a pastor, and so he was still working out in the business world in Michigan, and so we lived in this trailer park. And I'd mentioned this before to my homeroom class in Bible. In Acts chapter 18, I had some stories about our life when we lived those 9 months in the trailer park. But in the trailer park, there wasn't a lot of trailers in there because it was kind of a newer trailer park. There wasn't a lot of kids in the trailer park because there wasn't a lot of families. The manager of the trailer park, he lived down the road. Just as you enter the trailer park, he lived in a trailer that was there. He had a son and twin daughters. The twin daughters were my age. The son was a couple years older. And the son's name was Michael. Now, we had been there for a couple months, so we had made a lot of friends, but all our friends lived outside of the trailer park, and there was a bunch of kids that lived outside of there, and I had some stories about those friends as well from my homeroom class in previous chapters, but so we all kind of had this group. I was probably the youngest in the group because the Michael and his twin sisters really weren't part of our group because they had just moved in. And but there was a bunch of people. There's probably 12, 13 of us in this friend group that we had that did a lot of things together. And so one of the boys who was probably my best friend at the time, his name was Mike, and he was a couple years older than me as well. And then there's another boy who's maybe a year or so older than Mike, whose name was Vern. And these two guys decided, while they were sitting in our trailer, we were all kind of sitting there together, just talking and having fun and stuff. And they decided they were mad at Michael, and they wanted to beat him up. Those were their words. And so they were trying to figure a way how they could get Michael out of his trailer so they could jump him. They were going to wait in ambush for them. That was their plan. And so they were trying to figure things out, and they turned to me and my sister Sabrina, who's just a couple years older than I am. They turned to us and were like, okay, we got the plan. This is what you're going to do. We want you to go to Michael's trailer. Get him out of there. We don't care what you say, lie, do something. Get him out of that trailer. Get him over here, and we're going to be hiding behind these trees. And when it gets to us, we're going to jump out and beat him up. And so, Sabrina and I weren't real bad kids, but we weren't great kids either. So we made a wrong decision, and we agreed to go along with their plot. And so we're trying to think about what we could say to get Michael out of his trailer. And Michael was the kind of kid that loved nature. He loved fishing. He had a slingshot that he used to go hunt rabbits and squirrels with, and he just kind of that outdoorsy type of guy. And so we used that to lure him out of his trailer. So I remember we all went outside, and so Mike and Vern are like, okay, if you get Michael to this tree right here, that's all you have to do. We'll take it from there. So they're pointing to at which tree that we got to bring him to. So we're like, okay. Everybody else is just kind of, walking around and talking, waiting for this all to go down. So Sabrina and I start walking toward Michael's trailer. We both knew that what we were doing was wrong. We both liked Michael. We got along with him okay. His twin sisters were in my class in second grade. But we didn't want to disappoint our friends. So we kept walking. And I don't remember how far it was from my trailer to Michael's, maybe 100 yards. I mean, when you're younger, everything looks bigger and farther away. But it was a walk. And so we were walking, and the closer we got, the more nervous we were, and probably the worse we felt. But we just kept on going because we didn't want to disappoint our friends. And I remember walking up the 2 steps to get to the top of Michael's porch there, and the screen door was shut, but the other door was open. It was in the summertime, kind of a late spring, a kind of a warm day. And we knocked on the door, and Michael answers it. And as soon as we saw him, we kind of turned on the excitement. And we're like, Michael, you're not going to believe this. In a tree by our trailer is a white squirrel. It is the coolest thing we've ever seen. And Michael's eyes got really big. And a smile went over his face, and you could just see the excitement in his face as my sisters Sabrina and I kept building up the excitement around this white squirrel that wasn't really there. So Michael's like, "Oh, let me go get my shoes." So Michael ran back, and he was gone for seconds. He comes out, opens the door, right? And then we jump down off his porch, and we start running toward our house, our trailer, toward the tree where we were supposed to lure Michael to. And he's so excited. We get a little bit closer. He's like, "Where is it? Where is it?" We're like, "It's right in that tree right over there." And we pointed to a tree just on the other side of that line that we were supposed to bring Michael to. And so we're like, "Oh, there it is." And so we kind of stopped. We got him past that line. We're like, "Oh, it's right up there." And he's like, "Well, I can't see it." And Sabrina and I started walking away. And as we started walking away, Vern jumped out from behind one tree. Mike jumped out from behind another tree. And they slowly started making their way toward Michael, who was still just looking up for the squirrel. And then he stopped and he realized what was happening. And I remember that first push. Vern took his two hands and just pushed Michael in the chest right up against Mike. And Mike threw him back to Vern, who pushed him back to Mike. And I remember hearing Michael say, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this? What did I do?" And Mike pushed him back to Vern. And then I didn't see this, but I heard this. I heard the sound of fist hitting face as Vern threw a punch that hit Michael somewhere in the face. I don't know, I didn't look. I heard the punch, and I felt the punch right here. I felt it. And I knew that what I had done was wrong. And immediately I felt bad for being part of this. I can't believe I did it. I still can't believe I did it. But I can't change the past. They went on to beat up Michael a little bit more. I heard some more screaming. I heard some more punches. I heard some groans, and finally they let him, and he ran back home, just screaming and crying, back to his trailer. And Mike and Vern came in there all laughing, and it was just kind of this great thing for them. But Sabrina and I felt so bad. But, we really not much we could do about it until a couple hours later when Dad came home. I think the manager of the trailer park stopped Dad's car as he pulled in, because when Dad got back to our trailer, he knew what had happened. And he called Sabrina and I in and had a not so pleasant chat with us. But the punishment that he could have given, or that he did give, wasn't nearly as bad as how I had already felt. And then he looked at us and said, "You got to go apologize to Michael." And we were like, "Oh no." I mean, we knew we had to, but we didn't want to. So like, "Oh, we can't do that." He said, "You're going to apologize to him. And then he said, "And you're going to do it now." And so Sabrina and I looked at each other, and we both had that same look of fear and nervousness as we headed out our door and onto toward Michael's house, and we took that walk, and that walk seemed like forever, but yet it went by like that, because the next thing we knew, we're standing at the bottom of his steps to his porch, and we took a couple steps up, got to his porch. The door was still closed or open, but the screen door was shut, and we knocked on the door. There was no answer. We waited what seemed like an awkward amount of time, and we knocked again. We were just hoping Michael would come to the door so we could apologize. But entering the doorway and right in front of us was Michael's dad. And so we had to look up at Michael's dad and we said, "Can we talk to Michael?" Dad didn't say anything to us. He turned and walked away. A few moments later, Michael walks up and he's got ice on his eye. He's got scratches on his arms. He's got a cut on his head. And he was beat up pretty bad. And we just said, "Michael, we're so sorry that we did that. Will you please forgive us?" And he did. He did. But that was over 40 years ago. In fact, that was about 45 years ago is when that happened. And I still feel awful for doing that. I know God has forgiven me and Michael's forgiven me, and I guess technically I've forgiven myself, but I won't forget it. And the reason I said early on it's a story that I have to tell you, I guess it's just a way that I keep, I don't want to say punishing myself, but I keep it in my mind because I don't want to ever do something like that again. And if I can keep remembering how I felt with that white squirrel and Michael, then that will hopefully keep me from ever doing it again. And it has so far for 45 years. It's kind of my punishment to myself. You can forgive, but I'm not going to let myself forget that. That plot, that ambush to get Michael. So when I get to Acts chapter 23, every year that I teach it, I can't help but think about that because I know what this was like being involved in this plot. So let's pick back up verse 25. The commander wrote a letter as follows. Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency Governor Felix, greetings. Back then they used to put their name first. If they were writing to somebody that was in a higher position of power, because that person might get the letter and they might look at it and say, Claudius Lysias, and I'm not going to read this guy. What's he wasting my time for? I'm more important than he is. And so they always did that greeting first. And so he says, to His Excellency Governor Felix, greetings. This is verse 27. This man was seized by the Jews and they were about to kill him. But I came with my troops and rescued him. Yeah, he didn't mention that he was going to flog him, but anyway. For I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but that there was no charge against him that deserved death or even imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him. So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antipatris. The next day they let the cavalry go on with him while they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear your case when your accusers get here. Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. The commander sent 470 people with Paul. sometimes I wish that, you know, as Sabrina and myself and Michael were walking toward my house before that first punch, I wish there were 470 soldiers kind of standing around Michael. Said, if you're gonna mess with Michael, you gotta go through us. Right? But unfortunately, that's not how my story ended up. But that is the end of Acts chapter 23. And so hopefully you're able to understand the significance of this. Lots of different things, not just my story. I don't want you to focus on my story. I want you to focus on God's story and what God wants you to know from Acts chapter 23. All right? So, enjoy, and like I said, when you get to the Acts video, look for that part where Luke acts like he is the centurion and have a little chuckle and think of me. All right. We will see you later. Goodbye.